Thursday, September 23rd here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to the Week 3 Preview Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jared Smolin. Jared, we're all a little sick over here, but I've got the caffeine, I got the vitamin C, I got the ibuprofen. I'm going to pull it together for this Week 3 preview.
That's what you got to do, man. We got, 14 weeks to go. We're just getting into this thing.
Yeah, Week 3 seems like we're moving along a little bit, though, and we're going to move right into that Thursday night game, Carolina at Houston. And, I mean, it's another one where you want to scoff at it heading in, but primetime games have been pretty good lately. So I'll hold out a little bit of optimism, but I'm not sure how long I'm going to be able to hold on to it because the Panthers are 8-point road favorites in this one. That's up one from where it opened. It's a 43.5-point over-under, and all the points are on the Panthers side because it's Houston and because Houston now is down to, third quarterback. I'm not sure exactly how you rank them at this point. We'll get to Davis Mills. But, I mean, the Carolina side's the only one with any attractive options here.
It is. And I guess we start with Sam Darnold, who I think is one of the better streaming options this week, largely because of the matchup, but also because he's playing well in both real life and in fantasy. Darnold's finished quarterback 16 and quarterback 14 in the first 2 weeks. So, nothing big, but he also, he's been fine if you've had to use him. And this is his best matchup so far. He's 13th in PFF passing grades through 2 weeks. And the other thing helping him too is Carolina's 7th in situation neutral pass rate. We talked about that last week too, and it continued in week 2. It looks like a pass leaning offense, which makes sense. And that obviously helps Darnold's fantasy production.
Yeah, Christian McCaffrey, we're basically never going to talk about on the show unless he gets hurt. But at wide receiver, I think it's something worth discussing because DJ Moore and Robby Anderson have basically switched roles from where they were last season and kind of gone back to what we thought that they would be heading into last year. The average depths of target, according to Pro Football Reference, stand at 9.5 for DJ Moore, 21 yards for Robby Anderson. I mean, that number is obviously coming down at some point for Anderson, but it's more like what he was with Sam Darnold with the Jets. And we were surprised that he was getting shorter stuff last year. It seems like they're flipping that this season, and that's probably part of why Robby Anderson has not really helped our fantasy team so far.
Yeah, and I mean, in general, we like those long passes. We like the air yards, but it does make players more volatile from week to week, especially with Anderson. He has just a 12% target share so far. Now, it was 9% in week 1. It went up to 16% in week 2. If he can be around 16, 17, 18%, like he's still going to be a wide receiver 3 for you. His playing time is right in line where it was last year. So I'd stick with him in most cases, especially in this matchup tonight. But I mean, to me, it's pretty clear that DJ Moore is the top wide receiver in Carolina now. He's dominating market share. If you watch the games, like Carolina's designing stuff for DJ Moore. So he's your top guy. He's a top 20 wideout basically every week. Anderson, for me, is still a wide receiver 3, especially in good matchups like we have in this game.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how they shifted the usage between last year and this year, considering the same coaching staff and most of the same players. But 19 targets for DJ Moore so far through 2 games, just 9 for Robby Anderson. I think that'll probably get a little bit closer, but I do expect DJ Moore to remain the number 1. Terrace Marshall also tied with Robby Anderson in targets, but Anderson's still well ahead of Marshall in both snaps and routes. So I think that we'll see a little bit of separation come between Robby Anderson and Terrace Marshall, but I also think that we're going to see games where either one is ahead of the other. I doubt that there's going to be a wide gap between them if things continue as they've started.
Yeah, the problem last week was you had Brandon Zylstra stealing targets from both of these guys. Hopefully that doesn't continue going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. On the Houston side, I mean, absolutely nothing looks mildly interesting besides Brandon Cooks. Cooks, 11th in PPR points so far, 6th among wide receivers in targets after 14 of them in week 2. We'll see what Davis Mills means for that target share this week, as well as the success on those targets. It's worth noting, at least for Davis Mills, that Houston has not elevated Jeff Driscoll ahead of him. Jeff Driscoll was on the practice squad, is going to be active, but it looks like he's just going to be Davis Mills' backup and maybe insurance policy here.
I mean, if you're Houston, you might as well get Mills out there and see what he has. What he's shown so far has not been good. Last week wasn't good. He was 8 for 18 for 102 yards, 1 TD, 1 interception. He was 32nd for the week among 34 qualifiers in PFF passing grades. Even in the preseason, he was 76th out of 79 qualifiers in PFF passing grades. So I'm expecting it to be ugly. This Carolina defense, by the way, first in Football Outsiders DVOA, first against the run and the pass. So I don't think they'll finish there, but I am buying this as like a good defense, maybe a top 10 defense, which again, just makes all these Texans options even less attractive.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of unattractive, there's the backfield in Houston where we got touchdowns from 3 different running backs in week 1. But then last week we watched them split 25 carries and 5 targets. Philip Lindsay was the high PPR scorer in week 2 because he happened to get a 22-yard touchdown reception on his only catch of the game. But even he was short of 10 points. It's really an easy situation to avoid completely.
For sure. And, Mark Ingram still got the 14 carries. He only played 31% of the snaps, though. Like, it was David Johnson leading the way in snaps. Like you said, Lindsay leading in fantasy points. And that's the game script we're going to get most weeks where, they're not going to be able to feed Mark Ingram 26 carries. So, the less investment in Houston's backfield, the better for you.
Absolutely. And let's move on from that game to Chicago at Cleveland. Browns by 7, over under 45.5. But the story here is that it's going to be Justin Fields' time. Cleveland, I think, looked in the preseason like it would be a tough matchup if Justin Fields got on the field this early. And obviously it's expedited by the Andy Dalton injuries last week. But through 2 weeks, just 25th in Football Outsiders DVOA is the Cleveland defense, 31st against the pass. Granted, they had to face Patrick Mahomes in week 1, but they also faced the Texans last week. Tyrod Taylor left that game with a 144.3 passer rating and 2 total touchdowns.
Yeah, I was gonna say Taylor was ripping him up. So it's not, I don't know. It's not an ideal matchup for Fields' first start on the road, but I think it's doable. But I mean, the reason you're playing him is for the rushing, obviously. And from the second he stepped on the field in the preseason, like you saw the rushing ability translate. So Fields played 92 preseason snaps. That's about a game and a half's worth of snaps. He had 92 rushing yards and a touchdown in that time. So, like, I think you can project him for 40 to 50 rushing yards. Wouldn't be surprising if he gets up over that. To me, Fields is like close in projection to Jalen Hurts. Like, similar rushing, but the passing might be iffy. But Hurts has been a top 10 fantasy quarterback in all of his starts so far. So I think Fields has a chance to finish as a quarterback 1 this week.
Yeah, and Hurts has yet to finish a game with less than 62 rushing yards as a starter. Justin Fields was not as frequent a runner as Jalen Hurts in college, but he is just as talented a runner. So if he takes off, he's certainly capable of gaining the yards, and he's a better passer. I mean, that's why he was an early first-round pick rather than a second-round pick like Jalen Hurts. Still a fringe fantasy starter for me in this first one, but the kind of fringe fantasy starter that if Justin Fields finished 6th this week because he ran for 80 yards, it wouldn't shock me.
He's just going to be more fun to start too than like even Sam Darnold. So if you want to enjoy your week 3, throw Fields in there. You've been waiting all this time.
Yeah, know the risk all this time. We got through 2 games so
2
far.
weeks.
Yeah. So, I mean, know the risk going in, but there's definitely upside if you feel like taking a chance. And in a week where people are actually excited to play Daniel Jones, I mean, there's some reason to play Justin Fields.
Yes.
Elsewhere on that Bears lineup, Allen Robinson, David Montgomery, I think belong in most lineups. And I'm not really looking beyond that this week, especially because Darnell Mooney was limited Wednesday with an injury.
Okay, yeah, that'll be worth keeping an eye on. I mean, Mooney's usage has been pretty solid so far. He's actually tied with Allen Robinson for the team lead in targets. He's run a route on 96% of the dropbacks. Like if you expect Fields to kind of elevate the offense, which I do, Mooney becomes more interesting. He's still in like wide receiver 4 territory this week for us, but he's someone who could become a fantasy factor if Fields sticks in there.
Yes, I agree. I like the usage on Mooney so far, and if things look good, I mean, as soon as next week, I think we could be using all of those Bears. On the Cleveland side of this one, Odell Beckham Jr., full practice participant Wednesday. I mean, it was frustrating after like a positive summer for him that he was inactive the first 2 weeks, but it might ultimately be a good thing that they gave him a couple of weeks off to make sure he's all the way back before getting Beckham out on the field. And if he does return to this game, which he certainly seems on track to do, he'll be doing so with no Jarvis Landry for at least the next 3 weeks.
Yeah, no Landry, and a great matchup too. I mean, we've talked about these Bears cornerbacks, and through 2 weeks, they're 28th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. They've allowed 5 wide receiver touchdowns through 2 games already. So I would, unless we hear like Sunday morning that Beckham's on some snap count, I would lean towards using him as like a wide receiver 3 this week.
Yeah, definitely an upside guy down in that range. I agree. As I said, no Jarvis Landry for a while. Nobody on the team has more than 8 targets through 2 games. And the 2 guys tied for the team lead are Austin Hooper and David Njoku. So, I mean, really, there's not a whole lot else to like on that Cleveland pass offense right now. We'll see where it goes. And it doesn't help anything that Baker Mayfield is dealing with a left shoulder injury. It doesn't sound like it's going to affect his availability for this game. But, I mean, if it's already starting out as kind of a low-ceiling passing attack, I mean, having an injury with the quarterback certainly not going to help it.
Yeah, Baker briefly left last week's game with that injury and was able to come back and finish it out. So he should be okay. The tight ends, like there's obviously opportunity for them. I mean, they were the focal points of the passing game last week after Jarvis Landry left. But I mean, it's a 3-man committee. Like after, it kind of seemed like Njoku might be emerging in week 1. Austin Hooper got back to leading the group in routes and targets in week 2. So I guess Hooper is still the best bet, but it's a 3-way committee with Harrison Bryant involved as well.
Yeah, they're both kind of stashes for me at this point. I will say Austin Hooper got dropped in my FFPC main event league this week, and I think I'm eyeing that pickup for next week, as kind of a bench stash. By the way, the lone touchdown reception among Browns through 2 games is Demetric Felton, that running back / wide receiver.
That was a great touchdown, too. That was impressive.
It was. Kareem Hunt, of course, in his usual RB3 territory, more likely to get carries if this game goes the way the Vegas line says. Again, it's a big line in favor of Cleveland, but that would also make Kareem Hunt less likely to get receptions. So tough to say what kind of game flow we want if we're Kareem Hunt owners.
Yeah, I would say the usage between Chubb and Hunt has been closer than I expected through 2 weeks. I mean, it's only 2 weeks. The Houston game, they kind of coasted to a victory. So I'm at least keeping an eye on it. Maybe you're downgrading Chubb a bit and upgrading Hunt. But it's such a good running game that you can kind of bank on the plus efficiency for Hunt. So I do think he's fine as like an RB3 or flex.
Yeah, especially when the line is strongly in their favor like this. Yeah. Arizona at Jacksonville, the Cardinals by 7.5, over under a 52 for this game. Second highest implied total of the week. I mean, you play everybody on the Arizona side at some level. We're going to have to watch DeAndre Hopkins. He missed Wednesday with a rib injury. Do we know anything else about that, Jared?
Nope, that's all I've seen so far. Hopkins hasn't missed many games in his career, so I'd bet on him playing. But if he doesn't, then it kind of clears things up. We know AJ Green, Rondale Moore, Christian Kirk will be on the field basically the entire game. So I think they'd all be nice fantasy options if Hopkins is out.
Rondale Moore is coming off a big game, and the numbers there were inflated by that ridiculously open 77-yard touchdown he got, but he has been targeted on 34% of his routes so far by the PFF numbers. The nearest Cardinal in that category, and that's dividing targets by routes, is AJ Green at 17.9%. So I'm ready to admit that I was wrong on Rondale Moore, because clearly when he does get on the field, they're looking to get him involved. He's wide receiver 43 in our PPR ranks for this week. So, not outlandish on Rondale Moore yet. We're not saying start him over that guy you drafted in round 4, but he's doing things.
Yeah, I mean, he still needs the playing time to come up. Like he's not going to keep getting targeted on, what would you say, 34% of his routes. Like that's not going to continue. I think the playing time is going to come up. It already did from week 1 to week 2. He ran her out on 38% of the pass plays in the opener. That was up to 57% in week 2. That was still 4th among Cardinals wideouts, though. Hopkins, Green, Kirk were still ahead of him. But like you said, it's clear they're looking to get the ball in Moore's hands when he's on the field. So he's usable now. If you want him to become like a reliable weekly play, you need those routes to come up even further.
Yeah, expect some inconsistency, I should say, but we're playing him down in the range where there's inconsistency. So he's in play, and especially in this offense that scored a bunch of points through the first 2 weeks. At running back, Chase Edmonds has seen 100% of the running back targets through 2 games, so that makes him fairly easy to play, like at the bottom of RB2 range, maybe even higher than that in PPR leagues. I mean, obviously it depends on what you have. James Conner should be a better bet for carries in a game like this where they're favored by a bunch of points, obviously if things go as according to plan. But the total lack of receptions makes it a little tougher to like him as anything more than I really need a running back play.
Yeah, and Connor just still doesn't look good to me. And he's only averaging 3.3 yards per carry, 0 targets so far. So he's not a guy I'd want to use. Like you said, the matchup is good enough where maybe he pops in a short touchdown. We still really haven't seen who their goal line back is going to be. It's probably Kyler Murray, but we haven't seen any true goal line carries for this team yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'll be tough to read. Anything else in that game before we move on?
Nope.
LA Chargers at Kansas City, Chiefs by 6.5, over under a 54.5. The Chiefs, of course, sport the highest implied total on the slate, as they do many weeks. Chargers also had no Derwin James, no Joey Bosa at Wednesday's practice. So we'll have to watch their participation level this week. They already missed Chris Harris, their top corner, last week. He was still out Wednesday as well. So there could be significant injuries on that Chargers defense heading into this game, which will only strap them further against a tough offense. Justin Herbert, though, has hit 300 yards in each of his 2 meetings with the Chiefs so far, 311 and a passing touchdown plus a rushing touchdown in week 2 last year, which was his NFL debut, of course, after Tyrod Taylor's unfortunate incident.
Yeah, I was just thinking we didn't include Justin Herbert in the buy sell hold report. Maybe we should have included him as a buy because he's finished quarterback 25 and quarterback 20 so far in fantasy points. Like he is playing so much better than that. And we know that the week 1 matchup was against Washington. That was pretty tough. Last week, he definitely disappointed against Dallas. Man, Herbert had 83 passing yards and a touchdown called back by penalties in that game. There were some drops by the Chargers, and he just hasn't. He's had bad touchdown luck so far. Just 2 passing touchdowns, a 2.3% touchdown rate. Like Herbert to me is still a top 10 fantasy quarterback. We just haven't got that production yet. It probably starts this week, and what should be a shootout against Kansas City.
Yeah, he's the kind of guy that if you're sitting on Tom Brady and you're looking for an upgrade at running back or wide receiver, you could package Brady with something else and get Herbert plus a big upgrade at one of those other positions coming back.
Yeah, definitely. The Chargers, by the way, so they're 5th in situation neutral pace, so they're fast paced offense, and they're 4th in situation neutral pass rate, so they're throwing at a high percentage. So that it's all there for Herbert. I really think the points are going to start coming now.
And this also looks like a positive matchup. Football Outsiders has the Chiefs as the 2nd worst defense through 2 weeks. Chargers just 20th on offense, but there have been scoring opportunities. There have been touchdowns left on the field. I would, if I were betting this game, I would take the Chargers with the points because I think that they're capable of winning this game.
Yeah, I don't know if they'll win, but I think they'll keep it close, and I think both teams will put plenty of points on the board. So I like the Chargers getting those points.
Yeah, I'm not betting on them to win, but I won't be shocked if they ended up winning this game. Austin Eckler, Keenan Allen, now Mike Williams are all easy starts among Chargers. Jared Cook is an option. He's in that range where really no tight end is truly attractive. I'd say starting with tight end 10, Dallas Goedert in our rankings this week, and that depends some on Zach Ertz's status. But from there down, everybody has issues, and I think you can just kind of toss them all together in a hat and pick one.
Yeah, I like Cook, though. I mean, the usage has been there, and he's running her out on like 2/3 of the pass plays. He saw 8 targets in week 1, 5 targets in week 2. He looks good. Again, Herbert looks good. Just kind of investing in this Chargers offense, I think, is smart, and Cook is part of that.
Yes, I agree with that. On the Chiefs side, we know the obvious guys. Mecole Hardman, though, quietly had a solid week 2. Demarcus Robinson, Byron Pringle scored touchdowns, but Hardman played well ahead of those guys, 78% of the snaps versus 59% for Demarcus Robinson, 22% for Byron Pringle, and he tied Travis Kelce for the team lead with 8 targets. So I think Mecole Hardman is in that Rondale Moore territory.
Yeah, I thought that was probably Mecole Hardman's best game as a pro. And he didn't make any massive plays. It wasn't a huge game in the box score, but he didn't make any mistakes, which I feel like every game so far he's made at least one mistake and pissed Patrick Mahomes off. So I don't know, maybe he's trending up. I still wouldn't want to use him in fantasy lineups. I still think he's a smaller part of this offense, but we'll see. He should definitely be stashed, in case he finally does start to get it.
Yeah, you could do worse. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, speaking of worse, dead last among 36 qualifying backs in both of the main Football Outsiders rushing efficiency metrics. And worse yet, Darrell Williams might be catching up to him in passing game usage after week 1. So, week 1, Clyde Edwards-Helaire led 30-9 in routes. Last week, it was 16 for CEH, 11 for Darrell Williams. So, I don't know. Things might be getting worse.
Williams also got the team's first and only carry inside the 5-yard line last week, so it's possible he's their goal line back. Edwards-Helaire is bottom of the league in any rushing category you can look at: PFF rushing grade, elusive rating, yards after contact per attempt. He's not playing well, so that's not good. And then he's on the field for the Chiefs offense, so you think that's good, but the usage it's just not great. It's a pass first offense. And Edwards-Helaire is no better than 3rd in line for targets. He might even be 4th behind Hardman at this point. So Edwards-Helaire finished 21st among running backs in expected fantasy points in week 1. He was 42nd last week. So even just the usage says, he's like a lower end RB2/RB3. And then if he's not playing well, he's not even going to, meet that usage.
Yeah. My friend Meadloop, who is a professor at Ithaca College and an avid fantasy player, called CEH Devin Singletary this week, which makes sense. And if we were starting out as a mid-round draft pick and looking at it through that lens, it would look okay. It would look better what Clyde Edwards-Helaire is doing so far, but it's because they took him at the end of round 1, because we all got excited about this, new feature back for the Chiefs, that he looks terrible at this point. And I mean, I think we just need to adjust our expectations. I don't think he's going to hit the ceiling that we all thought was possible when he was drafted by the Chiefs.
Yeah, and he's not dead in fantasy. Like, I think if he's your RB2, it's fine, because again, he's playing most of the snaps. There's going to be some bigger games just because of this offense, but I'm kind of done expecting Edwards-Helaire to finish as even like a top 12 fantasy back this year.
Yeah. Washington at Buffalo. Bills by 7.5, over under 45.5. Vegas doesn't seem to be respecting Taylor Heineke in this game. The guy's now started 3 NFL games, one for Carolina back in 2018, then the Washington playoff loss last year before last week's game. Threw for 274, 307, 336 in those games. He's got a 104.4 passer rating so far this year, completing 73.8% of his passes in about a game and a half this season. It's a tougher matchup, of course, though, this week against a Bills defense that Football Outsiders ranks 3rd against the pass to date.
Yeah, I think that Bills defense is probably the bigger reason why, Washington's implied for just 19 points here. But yeah, Heineke is playing well. I mean, he was 9th in PFF passing grades last week. He is kind of the type of fantasy quarterback we want, where, he's aggressive. He can run a little bit. So I still think he's in play in 2 quarterback leagues. I mean, you shouldn't have to go there as a 1 quarterback league spot starter, but I think he's fine in two quarterback leagues. Should be playing from behind again here. I think he'll have plenty of volume.
Yeah, and more importantly, he has certainly not been bad for Terry McLaurin in their limited time so far. This week is a tougher individual matchup for McLaurin. He's likely to see a lot of Tre'Davious White as opposed to James Bradbury in primary coverage, but I mean, Terry McLaurin is probably going to be in most lineups for teams that he's on.
And Washington moves him around, and I don't think like Trey White goes into the slot, so I'm not super worried about the individual matchup. And yeah, 30% target share for McLaurin from Heineke last week. So Heineke knew where to go with the ball.
Logan Thomas remains Logan Thomas. I think, Jared, we should just stick him at tight end 12 now in the weekly rankings through the rest of the year and talk about everybody else instead.
Yep, he's not going to help you win weeks, but he's not going to cost you either, especially with so many tough tight end situations out there.
Let's just hope that he doesn't lose any more touchdowns to Ricky Seals-Jones. But that's really the one Ricky Seals-Jones highlight that we get a year, so we should be all set now.
I got to be honest. I do this for a living. I did not know that Ricky Seals-Jones was on Washington until he caught that football last week.
Just call him Ricky Steals-Jones now. J.D. McKissic, I tweeted this last Friday after that Thursday night game against the Giants. All 4 of McKissic's carries and 4 of his 6 targets came inside the final 2 minutes of the 2 halves in that game. Plus, that long reception that he had also came in a 2-minute situation where it was outside of the final 2 minutes, but it was when Washington was trying to get down the field quickly and score to come back against the Giants. So J.D. McKissic is the 2-minute back for Washington, and if they wind up in that situation a lot in a game, he's going to get a lot of work. All that is to say, McKissic can work out for you at times, but there are also going to be more games like week 1 where he touches the ball like 3 times.
Yep, you nailed it perfectly. Nothing changed in this backfield from week 1 to week 2. Washington was just in more McKissic situations in week 2. So he's still a guy I would never want to mess with McKissic. And I mean, Gibson's going to be fine. Like, he's going to be more volatile than your top 5 backs because he's not playing in every situation. But he's still the clear lead runner, and he's still going to get plenty of volume in the passing game. So don't panic over Antonio Gibson's week 2.
Yeah, and we'll get to another situation that's very similar to this one in another game here. I will say, for McKissic's sake, if this game goes the way that Vegas projects with that 7.5 line in favor of Buffalo, could be a McKissic type game.
Could be. I don't want to, I don't want to gamble on that.
Right. Indianapolis at Tennessee, Titans by 5, over under a 48.5 one. Carson Wentz is hobbling around on 2 sprained ankles. Apparently the Colts are still hoping that he's going to play in this game, which says a lot about their backup quarterbacks. And I say quarterbacks because they elevated Brett Hundley from the practice squad, and he got primary first-team reps in Wednesday practice, reportedly, ahead of Jacob Eason.
Yeah, so that's obviously a situation to avoid in fantasy. It sucks for Michael Pittman, too, coming off his breakout game. Against a tough Rams secondary too. I mean, Pittman looked awesome in that game, both in like contested situations, runs after the catch. But with the quarterback situation, he's kind of tough to trust in fantasy lineups. Hopefully, Wentz can get healthy, because I do think Pittman can still be like a weekly wide receiver 3 if he has a healthy Wentz.
Yes, I would be hanging on to Michael Pittman right now, but probably not starting him in week 3 if I can help it. This is how ugly it gets at tight end quickly behind the elite guys. Jack Doyle has a single game of 8 targets and 5 catches and is all of a sudden a hot name at the position. So he was the guy that was picked up by the owner that dropped Austin Hooper in my FFPC main event league. And, maybe Jack Doyle is decent the rest of the way. That wasn't necessarily a fluke last week because he did run a lot more routes than Mo Alley Cox, 34-13 in that category. But week 1, it was just 24-20 in Doyle's favor. So that's basically even. Which of those two things is closer to reality from here on? We can't really answer that yet.
Yeah, that's always interesting thing after week 2. It's like if you see something happen twice, you can kind of bank on that going forward. But when you get one thing week 1, one thing week 2, then like week 3's got to be okay. Which one was the truth, week 1 or week 2? So we'll see, about Doyle's usage in week 3 here. I'll at least admit he's a better fantasy option than Mo Alley Cox going forward. But especially with Indy's quarterback concerns, I don't think you want to mess with the tight ends this week.
Yeah, not super interested here. And I mean, it's worth remembering he saw 33 targets in 13 games last year. So yeah. We're not looking back on a big season before this one. Jonathan Taylor, you kind of have to play. The rushing has not been good, though. 31st out of 36 qualifiers in Football Outsiders rushing efficiency metrics so far.
And the usage, it's kind of the concerns we had in the preseason that we wrote about. We had Taylor as our first round bust. And in week 1, we didn't see any Marlon Mack. In week 2, we did see some Marlon Mack. So it did turn into a 3-man committee. Jonathan Taylor played just 45% of the offensive snaps. And the Colts were trailing for a lot of the game, but it's not like they were trailing big. It was a pretty close game throughout. So that's the concern for Taylor. The good news, he definitely has positive touchdown regression coming. He hasn't scored yet, but he leads the league with 8 carries inside the 10-yard line. He leads the league with 6 carries inside the 5. He had 3 straight carries from the 1-yard line last week and couldn't get in the end zone. So it's going to get better for Taylor. But again, he's similar to Antonio Gibson, where some games the volume's not going to be there, so he's going to hurt you more than other quote unquote RB1s in fantasy football.
And if he has another rough game this week because of the QB issue and Indy just struggling to move the ball or score points, maybe next week or the week after will be time to look into his trade value in your league. So we'll see about that. Naheem Hines, I think the last Colt worth discussing here. To me, he's just a faster J.D. McKissic.
Yeah, pretty much. It seems like his role is a bit more consistent from week to week, but he's still going to have a lot of duds in fantasy. So better off if you're not needing to use him.
On the Titans side, Ryan Tannehill finished just quarterback 21 in week 2, but it did mark a big rebound versus what he showed us in week 1. He was QB 10 in our expected fantasy points metric. He threw for 347 yards in that game, just didn't get any TDs, and A.J. Brown played a role in that for him.
Yeah, A.J. Brown dropped, 3 passes. There was a Julio Jones touchdown that sure looked like a touchdown to me in the back of the end zone, but it was overturned on replay. So kind of a bad luck game for Tannehill. But he definitely played better. He was first in PFF passing grades for week 2. And we talked about the lack of play action in week 1. That came back up in week 2. It was 12% play action rate in week 1, up to 31% in week 2. So I'm kind of cautiously optimistic that this Titans offense is going to be okay without Art Smith.
Yeah, it's not quite a few. I can go back to playing these guys, but you feel a lot better at this point than we did last week.
For sure.
A.J. Brown, speaking of which, there's downside from the efficiency level that he had over his first 2 seasons, but not to anywhere near the point where he's ranked right now among wide receivers. So I think now would be a good time to look into his price, especially coming off the big game for Julio Jones, making it look like you can't really count on A.J. Brown, despite him getting 9 targets in that game at Seattle.
And again, he dropped 3 of them. He's well over 100 yards without that, and he hasn't had drop issues in the past, so that's not a concern. Playing time is fine. He's at a 22.5% target share. That's a fine number. I will note that he struggled against the Colts. He kind of had 3 games under 50 yards among 4 meetings, so I don't know what that means exactly, but if he has another down game, I would definitely be trying to buy A.J. Brown.
Yeah, for this game specifically, Ryan Tannehill has had 3 straight low-volume fantasy outings against the Colts. So it doesn't look like a game that we specifically want to target these Titans passing game pieces. I mean, if you have A.J. Brown, he's probably starting for you. But if it's close between him and somebody else, this is an okay week to consider benching him, I think.
Yeah. I mean, you'd have to be stacked, I think. Xavier Rhodes has missed the Colts' first 2 games. Their top corner. I'm not sure if he's going to be back for this one, but if he's out, that definitely makes the matchup easier for Brown and Julio.
Mm-hmm. Anything else from that game?
Nope.
Cincinnati at Pittsburgh. Steelers by 3 and over/under 44. On the Cincy side, no practice for T. Higgins on Wednesday. He's got a shoulder injury. Joe Burrow coming off a not terrific game in the loss to Chicago last week, so he's well outside starter consideration. We'll have to keep an eye on Higgins to kind of judge the other pieces of that passing game, I think.
Yeah, I think Boyd and Chase just become much easier to trust if Higgins is out, because Higgins has a 26% target share through 2 games, so he'd be leaving behind quite a bit of work.
Mm-hmm. Jamar Chase disappointed last week with just 4 targets, but did score the touchdown, has looked good through 2 games so far, and he's coming off a game where Chicago corner Jalen Johnson earned one of PFF's highest overall grades across positions for the week. So, I mean, we'll see where that goes with Jalen Johnson, but, that had to factor into Jamar Chase's overall numbers. We just saw a lot more targets go to T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd in that game. That's just something that's going to happen in the Cincinnati offense at times.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a poor man's version of the Bucs offense where you got 3 wideouts there. Kind of one of them's probably going to disappoint most weeks. Chase, it's only 2 games, but Chase so far looks like the downfield guy for the Bengals passing game. His ADOT is up around 18 yards. Higgins is at 10 yards. Tyler Boyd's around 6 yards. So again, that might just mean Chase is a bit more volatile than Higgins and especially Tyler Boyd.
Mm-hmm. On the Pittsburgh side, Deontay Johnson didn't practice Wednesday with his knee issue. What's the latest that we've heard on him?
Nothing. Like, we don't know. It's kind of strange. We don't know anything about the injury at all. I would, at this point, probably assume he's not going to play and get him out of fantasy lineups, and we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll have to wait and see on him. Juju Smith-Schuster and Chase Claypool obviously get a boost if Johnson does sit. I think James Washington sneaks into DFS consideration, but wouldn't be on my radar for season long. Pat Freiermuth, though, is he on the radar now?
I mean, the usage is trending out. The entire issue with this offense is Big Ben looks like he's done. And, he already has a pec injury now. I'm sure he'll play through it because he always does. He's such a tough guy. But, yeah, Freiermuth already ahead of Ebron in week 2 in snaps and pass routes, also out-targeted him 4-2. So if you're stashing a Steelers tight end, I don't think you should be starting either of them at this point. But if you're stashing one, I think it should be Freiermuth because, as a rookie, if anything, his role just should continue to ascend throughout the season.
I tried for Freiermuth on our FFPC waivers this week. He went for $14. That's like in a format where you start with $1,000, but I'm under $230 at this point. So do you think I should have bid up beyond 14? I think I put in like $11 for Freiermuth. Do you think it was a mistake or a good place to kind of be reserved?
I mean, I guess it depends who your other tight ends are, but I think whoever got Freiermuth for $14 in FFPC, that's a good deal.
Yeah, I think that ends up being a good buy as well. I just dropped Blake Jarwin this week, by the way. We'll get to the Cowboys later. It kind of hurt a little bit, but I've been kind of building myself up to it.
Yeah, I think you're fine.
Anything else on Pittsburgh before we move on?
No, not Harris. You just got to keep starting him. Like, it's going to be ugly, but he's getting that usage. He actually had a nice fantasy game in week 2.
Yeah, finished top 10 because of that receiving touchdown. So, We'll take it, I guess, if he's Cordarrelle Patterson. New Orleans at New England. Patriots by 3, over under 42 in a game that I do not want to watch at all. Sure. I'm a little worried about Alvin Kamara in general, and I'm specifically worried about the attention that he should get this week because he's basically the only thing even semi-dangerous on the New Orleans offense, it looks like right now. I don't think there's a whole lot you can do in fantasy except play him and keep your fingers crossed. But, I mean, New England comes in number 3 in defensive DVOA overall. Saints are 29th in rush offense. Kamara 33rd in rushing DVOA among 36 qualifying backs. I got to say, I think that this game has shutout potential on the New Orleans side.
Yeah, what's the over-under at here? It's at 42. I would bet the under if I was betting a side. These teams are both top 5 in DVOA. I think both offenses are limited. So I don't expect a big game from Kamara. It wouldn't be a week to use him in DFS. I'm not as worried about him over the rest of the season, though. The biggest problem, the Saints have run a league low 103 offensive plays through 2 weeks. So that's bringing all their production down. Kamara's shares of the rush attempts and his target share are both sitting at career highs. He has a 26% target share through 2 weeks. He's handled 56% of the rush attempts. So that's all there. He just needs the play volume to come up. He needs the offense to play better. That's probably a concern. We've had one good Jameis game, one bad Jameis game so far. But Kamara week 1 he finished RB5 in expected fantasy points. Even in week 2 he was RB20 in expected fantasy points, and that's with the low play volume. So I think if Kamara has another dud in this game, I'd actually be looking to buy him in fantasy.
It'd be something to watch. I think it's worth talking about because basically nobody else in this offense is even worth talking about at this point. I have no idea yet if Marquez Callaway is actually a thing. He's seen 6 targets through 2 games, but this isn't a matchup to bet on him getting started either.
Nope. Tough matchup. He's been on the field, hasn't translated to fantasy production yet. At tight end, we had Juwan Johnson pass Adam Troutman in routes after it was, vice versa in week 1. So that's another situation to monitor, but probably only FFPC leagues. Neither of those guys should be in lineups in standard fantasy leagues.
Yeah, the fact that Juwan Johnson versus Adam Troutman is relevant shows you what you need to know about this New Orleans offense. On the Patriots side, I doubt that James White continues to average 6.5 targets a game throughout the year, but I would say the Mac Jones switch has been even better for him than we expected through 2 weeks. And really, averaging 6.5 targets per game for the year is within his range of outcomes. It would still put him short of what his 2018 target rate was. That was, I think, the year where it was Julian Edelman and him and nobody else.
Yeah, White has a 19% target share so far. I mean, that's high for a running back, but it wouldn't shock me if he finishes the season around there. So in PPR, if White's your RB3 or a flex, I think you're solid there. Damian Harris still dominating the ball carrying work, 6th in the NFL in carry so far, 39 through 2 games. He also has all 3 of the team's carries inside the 5-yard line. So it's gone exactly how we expected with Mac Jones. More targets for James White, goal line carries for Damian Harris. Both those guys are winners.
Yeah, this is a bad spot for Damian Harris, though. 3rd in run defense DVOA are the Saints, so there's still a strong run D, which they've been for several years now. And their first 2 games came against Aaron Jones and Christian McCaffrey, so it's not like they've been loading up against weak opponents. So I would try not to use Damian Harris if it's questioned this week. I think James White is a solid guy to use. I think James White is what you are hoping J.D. McKissic and Nyheim Hines will be. I do think that there will be targets there. There are obviously going to be down weeks. I had to laugh. There was a question for us on Twitter today where somebody was asking if he should trade James White to get Cordarrelle Patterson. I just responded with that gif of the 2 Spider-Mans pointing at each other.
Yeah, I don't know what to do there either. I'd probably rather have James White if it's full PPR.
I mean, it's the same dude, basically. They're both probably they both should be heavily involved in the passing game, and it's just going to vary week to week who's better.
Yeah.
Back to the Patriots, Jacoby Myers, 2 targets ahead of James White so far for the lead on the team. I think he's okay as a low wide receiver 3 or wide receiver 4 in PPR. There are plenty of issues in the New Orleans secondary right now, so I think Jacoby Myers is fine this week. And then at tight end, it's Jonnu Smith, it's Hunter Henry, and we don't know which one's number 1 versus number 2, but they're both kind of okay in that everybody has issues area of tight end.
Yeah, Henry's run more pass routes than Jonnu Smith so far, but Jonnu Smith has 10 targets to Hunter Henry's 7. So yeah, they're both tight end 2s, and you're kind of just hoping for a touchdown.
Exactly. Anything else from that game?
Nope.
Atlanta at the New York Giants. Giants by 3, over under 47.5. On the Atlanta side, we got Russell Gage, who's week to week with an ankle injury. Doesn't necessarily mean he's out this week, but probably means that he's out this week. I think that could only help Cordarrelle Patterson's opportunities. He, of course, is the buzz guy on Atlanta's offense right now after scoring 2 touchdowns in last week's game.
Yeah, I'm just curious to see if his role really grows from here because, what is it? It's his 7th or 8th year in the league, and he's just never been a running back. The role they have him in now is nice. He, most of the carries he's getting are pitches and outside stuff, just get him in space. And then he's playing a pretty sizable role in the passing game. So, at this point, it seems like he's been picked up in, most leagues, which he should be owned in most leagues. I wouldn't want to get him in lineups yet. I kind of want to see it another week or 2. But once bye weeks start to hit, Patterson might be useful in PPR leagues.
Yeah, I mean, it's just similar to guys like Kareem Hunt, James White. They're not going to get usage every week. Sometimes they will get usage, and they can produce off of those things. Cordarrelle Patterson is going to be more exciting to watch than Mike Davis. If he weren't, he wouldn't still be in the league because that's his calling card. He hasn't been able to settle in at running back or wide receiver anywhere, despite having been a first-round pick back when he entered the league, because there's that limitation to him. But he's an exciting player that you like to get the ball to some. So I would expect his role to stay about where it is. Last week, it was 7 targets apiece for him and Mike Davis. Like I said, I think Cordarrelle Patterson is the bigger physical talent, but there's also the workload cap. So that makes, I think, Mike Davis the better weekly bet for touches.
Yeah, I expect Davis to remain the better weekly bet for touches in this backfield. I mean, his usage has been solid. The playing time, the pass routes. He has 13 total targets through 2 weeks. That's tied for third among running backs. So the Falcons' offense is my concern here. But Davis's usage, I think, still has him in like lower end RB2 territory.
Yeah, it was 16-4 in touches between them last week with Davis the leader, but Davis nearly doubled Patterson in playing time. So again, he's the better bet to get those touches. Patterson's going to be the flashier one. Calvin Ridley, Kyle Pitts are obvious, and no thanks to me for me on Matt Ryan in one quarterback leagues.
No, like after Big Ben, Ryan's like the next guy I'm concerned might just be done. He just does not look good. PFF has him 25th in their passing grades, and that's the concern for Pitts and Ridley. But Pitts and Ridley still look awesome. Their usage is awesome, and they're the two guys that should benefit if Russell Gage misses this game.
It'll be interesting to see where this class of quarterbacks goes to see if Atlanta winds up regretting not taking a quarterback in this draft. On the Giants side, Evan Engram returned to limited practice, first time since that injury in the third preseason game. Seems to be trending toward playing. I would be wary of playing Evan Engram in his first game back, though.
Yeah, definitely a wait and see situation for me. Like let's see him get through a game healthy, then we can think about using him in week 4. Sterling Shepard is a must in PPR at this point. Currently 9th at the position in points, tied for 11th in targets. Kenny Golladay is also doing okay. I mean, he's not great so far, but 6 and 8 targets in his 2 games. Some tougher corner matchups versus Denver and Washington. It's a much better matchup for him this week against Atlanta. Yeah, Galladay's like a tepid buy for me. I don't want to be too excited about him, but like you said, the usage has been good. He 90% route rate, a 20% target share for Golladay. He leads the team in air yards. He leads the Giants with 6 red zone targets and 2 ed zone targets. So he's the guy getting the touchdown looks, which should be the case, considering his size and athleticism. He just still doesn't seem to be on the same page as Daniel Jones. And we heard about that throughout the summer, I guess early in the summer, then Golladay missed all the time with the hamstring. So I do think if those two can get on the same page, Golladay can still be like a weekly wide receiver 3. And again, you might be able to get him for a lot cheaper than that right now in the trade.
I don't know. I'm not sure how strong a reader either of these guys is, so we'll see about that. But yeah, Kenny Golladay wouldn't be like the centerpiece of something that I'm trying to make happen in trade, but he's a good throw-in where you could probably get him from somebody, and there's upside, and if he doesn't wind up paying off, then you haven't really lost anything.
Yep.
Golladay is just 1 target ahead of Darius Slayton so far, trailing Slayton in yardage and fantasy points, but ran 12 more routes last week, 15 more for the season right now, a higher PFF receiving grade to this point. And Slayton's coming off a particularly ugly outing. I also wonder if Darius Slayton might be the one most affected by Evan Engram's return, because it's kind of tough for me to imagine the Giants taking Sterling Shepard off the field a whole lot to make room for Evan Engram.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, Slayton's definitely the number 3 wide receiver in New York. He has shown throughout his career so far he can pop for big games, and it's another good matchup here. So, Slayton is more interesting this week than usual. He's still, well outside the top 40 wide receivers in our rankings.
Speaking of the matchup, are we going to get a Saquon Barkley rebound week?
All his playing time is there now. I mean, it shot up from week 1 to week 2. He played 84% of the snaps in week 2. But still only had 13 carries and 3 targets. Like it seems like to me he's on like a touch count in these games. Like the Giants are running so many read options, and Daniel Jones is keeping a lot of them. I feel like they're like, don't hand the ball to Saquon here. We got to keep him under 15 carries or whatever. So again, the playing time's there, and this is easily his best matchup of the season so far. You're starting Saquon this week, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's like a semi breakout game for him.
He's also $6,000 on FanDuel this week. I haven't checked his DraftKings price, so it's going to be interesting. Baltimore at Detroit, Ravens by 7.5, over under of 50 points in that game. You play everyone on the Ravens side that makes some sense. Marquise Brown is somebody we'll have to watch. He was limited Wednesday with an ankle issue, but I think he's a good play as long as he's good to go by the weekend.
Yeah, he's always banged up. He was questionable with that ankle going into week 2 and played and looked fine. He's finished wide receiver 17 and then wide receiver 7 in half PPR points this year. And dating back to last season, he has 80 plus yards and or a touchdown in 10 straight games. Now he's kind of like breaking out quietly and kind of, being the first round pick that he was drafted as. And obviously you can't get a better matchup than this one. So Brown should be in fantasy lineups. Even Sammy Watkins I think is, a spot start option this week. His playing time has been there. And again, the matchup's good for everyone in Baltimore this week.
Yeah, Watkins just one target behind Marquise Brown through 2 games. So getting the usage that you mentioned. Tyson Williams, 10th in Football Outsiders rushing DVOA at the position. The usage also leaned back his way against the Chiefs last week after a second half downturn in week 1.
I mean, he clearly looks like Baltimore's best running back. And yeah, like you said, he played 49% of the snaps in week 2, led the team with 13 carries versus 11 for Latavius Murray and Devontae Freeman. It's going to be a committee, but Williams is and should be the leader of the committee. So you get a matchup like Detroit where they could run it 40 times. I think Williams is a nice fantasy play this week.
Yeah, it's a committee with the young hip CEO and the 2 former CEOs that are just kind of on their way out at this point.
Yep.
Detroit, and actually it's really questionable whether those other 2 guys were ever CEOs, but on the Detroit side, the Lions offense has been better than anticipated, at least in terms of production. The Ravens defense is also off to a rocky start. That said, I'm still not giving Jared Goff a serious look this week in 1 quarterback leagues of 12 teams or fewer, at least.
No, I'm not either. Hopefully you don't have to do that. He has finished as a top 12 quarterback in both 2 weeks now, both weeks to start the season. He's run for 60 yards already, which is like over halfway to his career high. So that's coming down. He has 93 pass attempts. That's tied for the league lead. So he's kind of benefited from volume, but he's playing pretty well. And this Lions offense isn't the disaster we kind of thought it would be, which is nice for TJ Hawkinson. It's nice for DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams.
Yeah, Hawkinson, DeAndre Swift, fairly easy starts. I think Jamal Williams is merely okay this week. The Ravens do stand 9th in run defense DVOA. And I mean, maybe it is a matchup that drives up Jared Goff's passing volume again. Just kind of a tough thing to bet on, especially back home, maybe Baltimore, which hasn't been awesome all the time on offense so far. Maybe they don't score as many points as we anticipate.
I mean, all the playing time stuff in this backfield is 2-1 in favor of DeAndre Swift. So I'd eventually expect the production to kind of go that way too. So Williams is still a borderline running back 3. You kind of expect 10 to 12 touches out of him every week.
Wide receiver Tyrell Williams is going to be out for a few weeks now. They just placed him on IR today with that concussion that had him out in week 2. Quintez Cephas has looked pretty good. I'm mildly interested in Quintez Cephas, and that's about the best thing I can say about the Lions wide receiver core.
I picked him up in the league this week, so I'm mildly interested as well. He's looked like their best wideout, and he ran her out on 90% of the pass plays in week 2. So I think Detroit kind of sees he's their best wideout too. So he's my bet to kind of lead the way the rest of the year, whatever that's worth. Because I still think TJ Hawkinson is the clear number 1 here. DeAndre Swift's probably the number 2 option in the passing game. So Cephas, a stash, someone maybe you can use during bye weeks, but hopefully you don't need to use him this week.
Yeah, Cephas is kind of what we were hoping Marquez Callaway was going to be for the Saints right now.
Yep, exactly.
Miami at Las Vegas, the Raiders by 4, over under a 45.5. Tua Tagovailoa has fractured ribs, so he's definitely out this week. We'll see beyond that. And in his place, Jacoby Brissett just ain't it.
There's not a single Dolphin I'd want to start this week. They're all kind of fringe guys to begin with. Then you get the quarterback downgrade to Brissett, who he's played quite a bit. He has over 1,000 pass attempts in the NFL, and he's a backup quarterback. So you kind of have to downgrade everyone, and you get Will Fuller back too, which just crowds the target picture. So hopefully you're not using any Dolphins this week.
Yeah, I mean, Jacoby Brissett is okay, but the Patriots who drafted him traded him away. The Colts, who had him as an insurance option for several years, let him walk so he could sign a backup contract somewhere else. So clearly he's just not a priority for anybody. Somebody's going to score for the Dolphins this week. It's a fine matchup for them against the Raiders, but it's just this committee everywhere offense where it's kind of uneasy to bet on anybody even when things are good. So when things are iffy, I agree. I don't want to bet on any Dolphins in my lineup this week if I can help it.
Yep, agreed.
On the Raiders side, Josh Jacobs is, quote, very questionable, according to John Gruden this week with his ankle, foot, whatever issues. Assuming that Josh Jacobs does not play, I would also rather skip Kenyon Drake and Peyton Barber if I can help it.
I think Drake has to be in the running back 3 mix, at least in PPR. He's finished as RB26 in both weeks so far, and that's largely been because of his passing game production. He has 11 targets through 2 weeks. Unfortunately, he got out carried by Peyton Barber last week. It seems like Gruden's kind of committed to that. So you're not expecting like a huge increase in carries for Drake. But again, he's obviously a big part of that passing game. So I think you can kind of lean on that if you need an RB3 in PPR.
Yeah, if you're looking for Naheem Hines or J.D. McKissic, I guess Kenyon Drake could be that guy.
See, I like Drake better than both those guys.
I mean, he's pretty much in the same territory, though, isn't he?
He has more carries than both of them, doesn't he? Drake played 71% of their snaps last week, so maybe he gets more. If he's out there for that high percentage of snaps, you'd think he'd get a bit more work than he got last week on the ground.
Maybe I'm underselling him. Maybe this is a better spot for him to get some carries than it was in Pittsburgh last week, and maybe it comes together. So, not totally off the radar, but certainly not somebody that excites me this week.
Yep.
Derek Carr, you'll find just beyond our top 12 in the rankings. The Raiders don't seem too worried about his ankle this week after he hurt it in Pittsburgh last week. It doesn't help, but Derek Carr has been excellent so far, so it's tough to bet against him, really.
Yeah, full practice for Carr on Wednesday. So at this point, I'm not very concerned about the ankle at all. He's been a top 10 quarterback in both of the first 2 games of the season. He's playing really well. He's 4th in PFF passing grade. And the Raiders are 2nd in situation neutral pass rate through 2 weeks, which I definitely did not expect. I'm sure Josh Jacobs' injury has at least something to do with that. But with Jacobs out again, I think you can kind of expect the Raiders to go pass heavy again.
Who would you play between Derek Carr and Daniel Jones this week?
Probably Carr, honestly. I do think Jones has a higher ceiling because of the rushing, but Jones can give you a 10-point dud like out of nowhere. Where Carr, I at least feel like he's not going to kill me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. I'm not ready to play Henry Ruggs this week, at least against some tough outside corners for Miami, but I do like the usage that they've added some short stuff to his game.
I know I'm a little scared that Henry Ruggs might happen this season now because it seems like the Raiders kind of finally figured out how to use him. Now he did catch the deep ball for the touchdown, so he can still do that, but he needs to get some of those shorter passes, which he did in week 2. That was his best game as a pro so far. So we'll see. He's still only running a route on like 2/3 of the pass plays. He's still behind Bryan Edwards. They're still, rotating in Zay Jones. So that needs to come up a bit, but definitely a step in the right direction for Ruggs.
Yeah. It's a move upward, as you mentioned, but I think that the Raiders have showed us at this point that upside in the Raiders passing game at wide receiver means you could finish like wide receiver 30. So I can't say that I'm too worried about not having much Henry Ruggs.
Yeah, again, it's a rotation, and we know Darren Waller is still the top option in the passing game.
Yeah, Bryan Edwards, I think, is okay to hold, but I also think he's droppable at this point if you're eyeing somebody on the waivers.
He is. It just seems like Carr doesn't want to throw to him for whatever reason. I mean, he's been out there. Edwards has been out there plenty, but he has just 8 targets through 2 games.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly early in his career, so I'm not giving up on Bryan Edwards long term, but not somebody that you need to cling to because big things are coming this year. I don't think he's Terrell Owens, for what it's worth.
Probably not.
New York Jets at Denver Broncos. Broncos by 10.5, over under 41.5. So the lowest point total of the week game wise, and you can blame the Jets for it because they are implied for 2.25 fewer points than the Texans, who are in turn implied for 1.25 less than number 3 Washington this week. So how does that translate for fantasy? Play absolutely nobody except maybe Corey Davis, and even Corey Davis is in wide receiver 4 territory in our rankings.
Yeah, I mean, Davis isn't immune to duds either, as he showed last week. I mean, Elijah Moore was the more productive Jets wide receiver last week. So those two are, probably closer than you thought they were going to be after week 1, at least. So I would not want to start either of those guys. Yeah, I wouldn't want to start anyone on the Jets. I did want to note that the backfield kind of turned into a 2-man committee last week with Tevin Coleman getting phased out. Coleman played just 10% of the snaps, didn't run a single pass route, had just 5 carries. You had Michael Carter, 11 carries and 3 targets. Ty Johnson, 12 carries and 0 targets. So at least it's a 2-man committee now. Like, Carter still needs more than that if he's going to become a fantasy option. But he was dropped in a few FFPC leagues. I tried to get him with like a $150 bid, but he went for like $225. So I check if he was dropped in some leagues. I do think Carter, by the second half of the season, if he's getting 15 or so touches per game, could be helpful.
He's a fine stash. I'd also rather stash somebody like Kenneth Gainwell, though, because I think that they're both kind of usable in the same range right now, and I think there's higher upside to Gainwell if somebody were to go down.
Yep, that's fair.
Speaking of running back stashes, since it just came up on YouTube, Azar Ahmed says, would you rather hold on to Trey Sermon or Tony Jones as a bench stash in half PPR? What do you think, Jared? Trey Sermon or Tony Jones Jr.?
I guess I'd go Sermon just because, he might not need an injury to, become a thing, where we know Jones needs Kamara to go down. And I mean, we'll get to the Niners backfield, but it's a massive question mark now with all the issues. So I would rather stash Sermon.
I agree. And I think even the bigger factor for me is that the 49ers offense and running game is something I would believe in more were Trey Sermon to get the opportunity than I do the New Orleans offense should Tony Jones Jr. become the top guy in that backfield.
Yep, agreed.
So going back to what we have here on the Broncos side of this game, I think you're playing any of the usuals against the Jets. We got our Cortland Sutton on back game against Jacksonville, and we also got Tim Patrick and KJ Hamler playing near identical snaps.
Yeah, I'm mad I didn't play Sutton in DFS last week. I think that was a good time to use him in like tournaments where, Judy's out. Sutton should have emerged as the clear top guy, and he did. So, you're definitely starting him in this plus matchup. KJ Hamler dudded last week, so he's tough to trust. Tim Patrick scored another touchdown. He still only saw 4 targets though. He has 4 targets in both games so far. So he's like a touchdown or bust guy. Again, the matchup's good enough where you can lean on him if you need him. But I still think the floor is low because, it's like Sutton and it's like Fant in this passing game. And then it's like Patrick and Hamler and Albert O is in the mix too. So you can't count on big volume for Tim Patrick.
Yeah, I'm not particularly excited about either of these guys. I think you're banking on some luck by playing either of them. It's a situation where there could be some luck. It's a good situation for getting luck from the passing game, but not anybody that I'm reaching for in either case. Conversely, I think it could be a good spot for either Javonte Williams or Melvin Gordon. I think we all expect Denver to control this game. So either running back in play, and it seems like just a matter of time before Javonte Williams kind of overtakes Melvin Gordon here.
Yes, he's Williams is outplaying Gordon. If you look at anything on PFF, rushing grades, elusive rating, missed tackles, Williams has been the better back. It's still an even split for now. It's still an even split on the ground, and Melvin Gordon is getting most of the passing game work. So even for this week, I think Gordon's a slightly better play. But long term, and by the second half of the season, if the Denver coaching staff is smart, I think Williams is going to emerge as the lead back here.
Teddy Bridgewater is a solid option in this game as well. I want to say that he's not a high ceiling guy, but he's thrown 36 and 34 passes, which are decent numbers through 2 weeks, especially considering that they won those 2 games by 14 and 10. So it wasn't like they needed to throw the ball to catch up or stay on pace with their opponents in those games. QB 12 overall through 2 games. Teddy Bridgewater is probably a little low, I think, at QB 18 in our rankings this week, but it's also a muddled range at the position.
I was going to say, there's just a lot of good streaming options this week with Fields and Darnold and Daniel Jones. I do think Bridgewater is right there with those guys. He finished quarterback 17 in week 1. He was quarterback 12 in week 2. And, this matchup is probably better than both of those, or at least equivalent to what he, got last week in Jacksonville. And he finished quarterback 12. So I do think he's a pretty safe week 3 spot start option, and, could sneak into the top 12 again.
Yeah, Teddy Bridgewater is like whether you go the safe route or whether you swing for the fences with Justin Fields.
Give me Fields there. I think like Bridgewater versus Daniel Jones is a good debate where Jones is kind of the higher risk, higher reward guy.
Yeah, I'm not even sure how much higher the reward is, but I guess with the rushing side for Daniel Jones, that'd be a case where you could go either way too. And I kind of hope nobody asks me that one because it'll be like either one could work out. It's going to depend on who gets more touchdowns.
Right.
Tampa Bay at the LA Rams. Bucks by 1, opened at Rams by 2 in this game. So a pretty significant swing in the betting line for this one. Over and under 56 points. This and the next game that we're going to get to are tied for the highest over under of the week. The Bucks implied total has climbed by 2.5 points from where it opened, from 26 to 28.5, now 5th highest on the week. I mean, I guess starting on the Bucs side, maybe the biggest news is that Antonio Brown is on the COVID list, and it's not guaranteed that he'll still be on it by Sunday, but it's looking pretty iffy that he's going to be able to make it back in time.
Yeah, he AB is vaccinated, so if he needs to be symptom free and get the 2 negative tests before Sunday. So he has a chance. There was the Adam Schefter tweet that basically made it seem like he was a long shot. So I don't know if Schefter has like additional information or what. I think at this point you should be assuming Brown's not going to play and know there is a chance he's cleared. I went back. So Brown missed the conference championship game last year against the Packers, and Scotty Miller and Tyler Johnson basically split playing time in his place. Scotty Miller had a slight lead in snaps and pass routes. So, I wish you could use one of them as like a spot starter if Brown's out, but I think if they're going to split, you kind of can't.
Mm-hmm. And I think otherwise you just play the guys that look like you should play them, and that includes not playing the backfield if you can help it.
I think Fournette's in play. Ronald Jones still sucks. Like he just can't get out of his own way. Arians gave him the start in week 2, and Fournette still ended up playing more snaps, getting more touches. Gio Bernard is just, he's not worth much at this point. He's only playing on passing downs like Fournette. Fournette's getting pretty good usage in a top 5 offense. Now Brady's stealing all the touchdowns because, I think Brady wants to break records this season, which he might. So that's kind of hurting Fournette. But to me, Fournette's a nice RB3 with upside because of this offense.
Fournette, it's funny how much Fournette looks like Chase Edmonds in terms of their usage and how he's scoring his points. He's getting decent carries. He's getting solid targets and receptions. Yep. And he's fine. I agree.
Yeah. So in expected fantasy points, he was 13th in week 1 and 19th in week 2. So he's getting the chances again in what's a great offense.
And to be fair to Brady, of course, he doesn't get, many people arguing for him. If you had the choice between handing it to Leonard Fournette to score a touchdown or throwing it to Mike Evans, or Rob Gronkowski, it'd be a pretty easy decision for me.
That's the thing. Fournette's still he's not good, but he's better than Ronald Jones and he's better than Gio Bernard. So I think he's gonna keep getting the ball.
On the Rams side, just play everybody that you're considering, but you should probably plan to not play Darrell Henderson for this game. We're going to have to watch reports on his rib injury. Kept him out of Wednesday's practice. At best, though, Henderson's going to be active at less than 100% against the league's toughest run defense. So it's going to be a tough spot to like Darrell Henderson at all.
And it sucks, too. I know we both have Michelle stashed, and even if Henderson's out, it's tough to get excited about Michelle. I'll probably still end up using him, just because I think he'll be a good bet for 15-plus touches and it's still a decent touchdown bet because this game should be a shootout, but the matchup's just brutal. Yeah.
Fortunately, the most important team where I have him stashed, I have Zeke Elliott and Aaron Jones. So I'm like, all right, I'll just wait and see what happens with Sonny Michel.
You're fine. Yep.
Don't panic yet on Robert Woods either. He's only slightly behind Van Jefferson in routes so far, basically even in that category. We've also seen that kind of setup with these Rams when it was Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, and Josh Reynolds in terms of the route distribution. Robert Woods' target share is also right in line with where it was last year, 23.2% so far this year, 22.9% last season. So, it hasn't happened yet. He's clearly been behind Cooper Kupp in terms of target share to this point, but don't give in on Robert Woods already.
No. Hang on to him. Consider trading for him. Definitely start him this week if you have him. We talked about the route rate down at 68% in week 1. It was at 97% in week 2. So I don't know what happened in the opener, but Woods is still going to be a full-time player in this offense. There's going to be a time where the production swings from Cooper Kupp to Robert Woods.
Mm-hmm. Anything else from that game?
Keep starting Tyler Higbee, who has awesome usage as far as playing time in the pass routes. I know he killed you last week, but if he's going to get that playing time in what looks like a top 5 passing game with Stafford, Higbee's going to be a top 8 fantasy tight end.
Yeah, you just can't react to duds at tight end. They're all going to put them up unless they're Travis Kelce and Darren Waller and TJ Hawkinson.
Yes.
Seattle at Minnesota. Seahawks by 2. That's up 1 point from where it was at the open. Over under a 56. Seattle has the 3rd highest implied total of the week. You're playing both quarterbacks here. They're both inside our top 12 for the week. The top 2 receivers for both teams are easy plays. Both lead running backs are easy plays here. I think the first player worth discussing is KJ Osborne from Minnesota, the number 3 receiver. I think he's in PPR consideration for deeper leagues at this point, talking 14-team leagues. Not quite ready to trust his target volume beyond that point, but there is room for him to settle in as the third target for Minnesota and for the tight ends to be downplayed, I think, because, it's just a limited position for them now. And KJ Osborne looks the part. I mean, we haven't seen a third receiver for the Vikings over the past few years, but it's quite possible that KJ Osborne, who I believe is in his third year right now, maybe even just his second, he might be the best third receiver that they've had in at least several years.
Yeah, he looks good. I do think he's like the third option in this passing game ahead of Tyler Conklin. I also think Osborne's efficiency is, going to regress. He's caught 80% of his targets. He's averaging 14 yards per catch. We also saw his pass routes go down a bit in week 2. He was at 89% in week 1, 69% in week 2. It seems like they just used a bit more two tight end stuff in week 2. So that's probably going to be volatile. I think you're right saying like he's a lower end option in like deeper PPR leagues.
Yeah, and I didn't take it down for this one, but I believe their neutral pass rate came down a bit in week 2 versus week 1, which was up from where it was last season.
Yeah, I know for the season now they're down to 24th. That's definitely lower than it was after week 1.
Mm-hmm. Anything from the Seattle side in this game, or it's just pretty obvious?
Pretty obvious. I think I've seen Gerald Everett dropped in some spots. His usage came up from week 1 to week 2. So I just being part of this offense, I still think Everett's a guy who, probably should be rostered in most leagues, just again, because tight end is so weak. I think Everett, he could still finish the year as a top 12 tight end.
Yeah, I would say very similar to Pat Freiermuth and Jack Doyle, though, in terms of what we can expect. Maybe higher upside on Gerald Everett and Pat Freiermuth, but all guys that are better to stash than use right now.
I think Everett gets the edge just because he's catching passes from Russell Wilson versus those two guys.
Mm-hmm. Sunday night game, we get Green Bay at San Francisco, 49ers by 3.5 in this game, over under 49.5. Let's start on the Niners side because they have a bunch of injuries at running back to watch. Jermichael Hasty is out for a while with his high ankle sprain. There was no practice Wednesday for Elijah Mitchell, which is with his shoulder injury. Kyle Shanahan said that they were hoping it was just a stinger, but that it's something a little worse than a stinger. So we'll see what that means. Trey Sermon was actually limited Wednesday, coming off his concussion. Seemed like he might be a good bet to miss a week, and we'll still see where he goes from there. We don't know whether Sermon or Elijah Mitchell are going to play, and if they don't, it could be Jacques Patrick and Trenton Cannon leading this backfield.
Jacques Patrick, yeah. He had a good preseason with the Bengals, 5 yards per carry. He was 6th among 93 qualifying running backs in PFF rushing yards. That's about all I can tell you about Jacques Patrick. He played in the XFL last season, so we'll see. Mitchell came back into last week's game, and the report with his injury is minor, so I'm kind of still expecting him to play. And Sermon seems to be trending in the right direction. Mitchell was dominating work again before he got hurt last week, so I don't know what the injury is going to mean for that. But if all those guys are active, I still think Mitchell is the best fantasy bet.
Yeah, check out our Fantasy Visions. Check out the player page for Elijah Mitchell to read more on it. But I think that based on what he did the first 2 weeks, the long touchdown run against the Lions inflated what he actually did in week 1. And I think the lack of having a long touchdown run in week 2 kind of deflated what he actually did. If you look at both of those games outside of that one key difference, they both looked very similar. And I think they look good in terms of his role in a run game that we like to have pieces of.
Yeah, I mean, he's just a bet on Shanahan's running game. What I've seen from Mitchell so far, he's not a special player, but if he's getting 15 carries in this running game, he's going to be useful.
Right. He barely missed a touchdown last week, by the way. They called it a touchdown initially, but then on review found that his knee came down, and then Jimmy Garoppolo vultured it on the next play. So Deebo Samuel, an obvious start at this point until something changes. 35.7% target share through 2 games, 20 targets over that span. George Kittle's second on the team with 9.
Yeah, it's Deebo's offense. Keep rolling with him. Brandon Ayuk, slight upticks in playing time in week 2, but still nothing in the box score. Still a guy you can't use. I'd keep him stashed. So I do think he's going to get back to something close to a full-time player, but not a week 3 option.
Yeah, we saw him build a little separation from Trent Sherfield last week, but we're going to need more separation before we can use him, and certainly more targets. And also, Jimmy Garoppolo did not look very good last week. He looked to me like a guy who's keeping Trey Lance's seat warm, especially anytime they asked him to pass beyond the line of scrimmage. And they had a surprisingly short passing scheme for that game. Lots of screen type passes for George Kittle. A surprising number of looks for Kyle Juszczyk. And it was just like it was a weird offense in that game.
Let's all cheer for the Packers in this one. We need the Niners to start losing some games so we can get Trey Lance in there.
That's right. On the Green Bay side of this one, thank goodness we got that Monday night bounce back from the Packers offense because we can now feel comfy using Devontae Adams or Aaron Jones the way that we should. Aaron Rodgers, by the way, went to San Francisco last November, completed 81% of his passes in that game, 305 yards, 4 touchdowns. So certainly no reason to believe that he can't do something this week.
Yeah, it's not a defense to be afraid of. So you're starting all your usual Packers. That doesn't include MVS, unfortunately. I don't know what to do with this guy. He's getting all the air yards. He even had that end zone target last week where he's open and Rodgers never misfires that badly. Like threw it at MVS's ankles. I don't know. I'm keeping him stashed because the usage has been there. That he just hasn't connected with Rodgers yet. Maybe that's just going to continue because he's Marquez Valdez-Scantling, but usage has been good. Fantasy production not good.
Yeah, he's a good guy to stash because if we get another 2 weeks of nothing, then you can drop him for something else. And even if, we get 1 week of nothing and you just want to drop him to pick up something else, you're not going to lose out on a guy who ends up finishing 20th among wideouts. But a solid stash working with Aaron Rodgers and getting plenty of targets to this point. Robert Tonyan, not a great spot for him. He's his usual TD or bust self, but just 7 targets through 2 games. That's 11.3% of the team total. So we haven't seen any role elevation versus last year yet. He's got 1 fewer target than Aaron Jones and 5 fewer than MVS, who you were just talking about.
Yep, same exact target share for Tonyan this year as last year. So he's the same guy. You're just banking on the touchdown, which he got for you last week.
Philadelphia at Dallas on Monday night to round this puppy out. Cowboys by 4 in this game, over under a 51.5. Jalen Hurts went from the league's shortest ADOT in week 1 to the league's longest ADOT in week 2. And what that tells me is that Nick Sirianni is going to vary his scheme quite a bit week to week for the matchups. Now, for the Cowboys this week specifically, they afford opportunities at all levels. So I would imagine that we'll see a mix. Maybe they try attacking deep again like they did against San Francisco. But I think that there's room for Philly to hit multiple areas in this game. It should be a good spot for using Jalen Hurts.
I think Sirianni should go back to the short passing game because Hurts was 2nd in PFF passing grade in week 1. He dropped to 21st in week 2. Now he still ran for 82 yards and a score last week, so he still finishes a top 10 fantasy quarterback again. Like it's hard for Hurts not to finish top 10 with the rushing production he's given you. And he threw for 342 yards against the Cowboys in one of his starts last season to go along with 69 rushing yards. So yeah, you hope his passing improves and comes back to what he showed in week 1, but it doesn't really matter if he keeps giving you that rushing production.
Mm-hmm. Devontae Smith has led the team in targets both games so far. I think he looks like a solid wide receiver 3 this game. There were several missed opportunities where Jalen Hurts just missed him with deep balls. And he also drew a couple of pass interference penalties, including one in the end zone. So if he gets a couple of those as catches instead, it's a better looking game than what it turned out to be. And like I said, there's nothing scary at all in the Dallas secondary. So it should be a good spot for Smith.
Yeah, it's just Hurts' inconsistencies that are going to impact Smith, but he's good and the usage is good.
Jalen Reagor got downfield more last game, including a long touchdown catch that was negated because it was called illegal touching because he stepped on the sideline on his way to making the reception. I wouldn't put Jalen Reagor in the lineup yet, but it's been a decent start for him through 2 weeks.
Yeah, it has been, and he's clearly their number 2 wideout in terms of playing time. I mean, you have Quez Watkins, by the way, had the long catch, but he was still at just 48% of the pass routes. He's still rotating in and out. So Quez is not a fantasy option. Reagor, a good stash. It looks like he might be taking a step forward, but I wouldn't want to use him at this point in week 3.
Quez Watkins last week might be the only time you see a 91-yard catch that doesn't go for a touchdown, by the way.
Yeah.
Dallas Goedert just 6 targets through 2 games, and his first look against San Francisco didn't come until into the 4th quarter. So that is a red flag for his situation in general. We'll see about Zach Ertz this week. He's on the COVID list. We'll see if he makes it back for Monday night's game. I think the extra day certainly helps his situation.
Yeah, Zach Ertz ran more pass routes than Dallas Goedert in week 2. So it's going to be up and down at best for Dallas Goedert. But if Ertz is out, that's when Goedert I think will be a top 8 tight end play if Ertz isn't cleared for this one.
Also worth noting, there are questions about Jalen Hurts' mid-range passing, which of course would take more of a toll on these tight ends than it would probably anybody else on the team. So we'll see where that goes. It's still early in his career. It's obviously early in the Nick Sirianni time. So, we'll see where it goes, but there are questions about him in that range. Not falling behind in score would help Miles Sanders. His game was fine last week, other than the Eagles falling behind and then playing catch up and putting Kenneth Gainwell on the field more. And that's where he lost out reps to Gainwell, who wound up with one more target. It's like the Antonio Gibson, J.D. McKissic situation where just like Antonio Gibson, Miles Sanders is the clear lead back in terms of playing time, but Kenneth Gainwell is the 2-minute back, and he's going to get those receiving opportunities, and he's just getting mixed in throughout the game, including red zone opportunities.
Yeah, Gainwell, I was a little surprised by this. He finished 30th in expected fantasy points in week 1 and 34th in week 2. So he's been getting RB3 level usage. It seems like he's a part of their game plan. So he's not massive upside if Sanders is healthy, but definitely someone you can use at that RB3 or flex level.
Yeah, he's like Tony Pollard right now, where he's getting just enough that if you're hard up for a running back, he can be an option. And if the starter goes down, then there's big upside to him.
Yep.
On the Dallas side, we're going to need to watch reports on Amari Cooper's bruised ribs. Early in the week for them, we'll get our first injury report today, Thursday. He hasn't tended to play well through injury in his career, though.
No, he hasn't. And this is a rib injury. It's not like an ankle or a knee, which I feel like he's had a lot of. So maybe it's a bit better case. I did see he's expected to be limited in today's practice. We'll see how he's actually listed on the report later. But if he's limited in the first practice of the week, that would make me think he's going to be able to play in this way. But that definitely comes with more risk. And for Dak Prescott, I mean, if Cooper's out, I think you got to worry about Dak a little bit, just missing 2 of his top 3 wide receivers at that point. So we'll keep an eye on it.
Mm-hmm. CeeDee Lamb, obviously an easy start at this point. Amari Cooper's situation, I think, also gives a little boost to Cedric Wilson as a deeper league option, DFS consideration.
Yeah, if Cooper's out, I think Wilson becomes interesting. He had just 2 targets last week. Even as the number 3, getting elevated to the number 3. He was still not a big part of the passing game. But if Cooper's out, Wilson will almost have to become a bigger part.
The tight ends, meanwhile, are cannibalizing each other. 8 targets for Dalton Schultz, 7 targets for Blake Jarwin through 2 games. As I mentioned earlier, I just dropped Jarwin, and I don't even feel that bad about it, honestly.
Nope. I'm still going to monitor every week, and if you start to see Jarwin pull ahead, which I still think might happen, then it'll be time to scoop him up and think about using him. But for now, it's just a 50-50 split right down the middle.
Yeah, I'm not expecting it because there are lots of Cowboys observers that like Dalton Schultz and are talking about his improvements over the past couple of years. I think this is just going to be a spot where they're more like Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz with lower ceilings.
All right, we'll see. I hope you're wrong.
I kind of hope I'm wrong, too. Both running backs, of course, are in play. I do buy Tony Pollard continuing to get chances, probably not quite to the same degree that he got last week.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see where – I mean – Zeke still is dominating in snaps and pass routes, but like when Pollard's on the field, it looks like he's on the field to get the ball. And Pollard looks better than Zeke to me. So I'm curious to see if his role continues to grow at Zeke's expense. For now, Pollard's like an RB3 flex, and Zeke's still in RB1 territory, getting the work he is in that offense. But again, I wouldn't be surprised if Pollard starts to get more work and Zeke starts to get a bit less.
Definitely something we will be monitoring Monday night and looking beyond that. That's going to do it for this Week 3 preview edition of the podcast. Head over to DraftSharks.com now. You can see our full Week 3 rankings to help you finalize those lineup decisions. You can check the My Teams page for customized lineup recommendations, plus the Who Should I Start tool, a free agent finder, trade partner navigator, lots more things to help you set winning lineups each week. You can also find us anytime in the free Draft Sharks Discord. You can find the link to join that in the description for this podcast, wherever you're consuming it. For Jared Small and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schauf saying thanks so much for swimming with us.